Welcome back. Every 26 seconds, someone in the U.S. becomes a victim of crime. It could be your son or daughter, your mom or your dad, or you. Each year, 3 million Americans become victims of violence. And here on the Suncoast, both the Sarasota and Manatee Sheriff's offices have teams of advocates to help victims through what is often a difficult and traumatic process from the moment the crime is committed to the courtroom. And joining us for more is Susie Brown, manager of the Victim Advocate Unit at the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, Judge ERIKA QUARTERMAINE of the 12th Judicial Circuit Court, and Autumn Rapolo, Victim Advocate Coordinator at the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, and one more guest, GB, if you could see right there. GB is a comfort dog. And Susie, why don't you start by explaining to me, what does the dog do?
GB, actually, we go to all appointments with child victims, and sometimes adults when they're really upset. We go to the state attorney's office when they have meetings there. We've sat in depositions, and GB's a comfort to them.
How?
They just sit there and pet him as they're talking, and we actually go in court with the child and he goes up on the stand with them, and they can pet him and just know that he's there.
Your Honor, from your perspective, how critical is it to have a victim of crime, let alone any witness, comfortable in the courtroom testifying? I could tell you from practical experience, it can be traumatic and very nerve-wracking.
Well, it's important that everyone in the courtroom feels comfortable, but there are methods under the law that provide for accommodation for victims of crime or alleged victims of crime and while they're testifying. And I think it's important when we talk about the term victim to understand that the use of the term victim does not always mean that there has been a finding of guilt or there could be a finding of guilt based upon the evidence. So we use victim often frequently before in a court of law there is an adjudication of guilt. So the methods that can be used could be clearing the courtroom of witnesses, or excuse me, of spectators, for example, or providing for a therapy dog, or in some circumstances with children, providing, notwithstanding the right of confrontation by a defendant, the opportunity for a witness to testify by video.
And Autumn, that puts people like yourself in a very difficult position because you are there to assist the victim of the case, but before, as the judge said, there is a guilty finding. So how do you handle situations like that?
We work with each victim, explain to them what can happen, what the process itself, what can happen, and just kind of discuss with them what it would be like if it didn't go the way that they were hoping that it would, and work through those things.
And I would imagine there are an incredible range of emotions and people that you are dealing with through this process. Some people, no matter what the crime would be, could handle things. Other people, I would imagine, are so traumatized by what they may have experienced that it could put, a prosecution or a defense into jeopardy.
Well, some victims don't even want to go to court. Some don't want to face their accuser. They just want everything to happen on the outside because they're too scared to go to court, which potentially hurts the state because they need the victim to testify. So we just help guide them through that and reassure them that we're there with them.
And Susie, how do you keep in mind that the victims in these cases are not only dealing with the legal case itself, but a whole lot of other things outside the judicial system, because in many cases their lives have changed dramatically?
We assist them the best we can as far as giving them referrals to the agencies that can help them with some of the things that are going on in their outside life, and that we support them as much as we can. And a lot of times the Attorney General's office, well, they have what's called victims' compensation, which we assist with doing the application for that, and that's for victims that have injuries or for funeral expenses, for counseling. It's the Attorney General's office, they make the decision on who they have qualifying to get that, but that helps them out in the moment.
And Your Honor, I can imagine how these victims are doing, whether or not there's an eventual guilty verdict or not. really has an incredible impact in terms of these trials and what happens in the courtroom. How do you balance that?
Well, you have to balance the rights of the accused, the right of that person to have a fair trial, with obviously any trauma that could be that could occur to the victim as a result of testifying. And I have to be unbiased, and I have to, when I balance those interests, make sure that I do not lead the fact finder or the jury to believe that I believe the victim is indeed a victim, because that is a fact in dispute. So every case is different, every analysis is different. The use of special accommodations for victims is done on a case-by-case basis, keeping in mind those considerations.
And I would imagine when you're dealing with children, that makes it even more complicated. But we're going to pick up on this discussion in just a moment, right after we check on our weather, so stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. If you're just joining us, we are discussing Crime Victims' Rights Week. What rights and resources are there available for friends, family, and even yourself after becoming a victim of crime? Our guests tonight are Susie Brown of the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, Judge ERIKA QUARTERMAINE, and Autumn Rapolo of the Sarasota Sheriff's Office. You know, Susie, talking about GB again, how is this dog, especially trained to help, victims who may be traumatized?
Well, we were pretty lucky with the Sheriff's Office. We had inquired about the therapy dog in 2011, a month after the law had been changed, where they would allow a comfort dog or a therapy dog on the stand with kids. And GB was a career change dog from Southeastern Guide Dogs. So he's been through their training with the seeing eye training. He had a minor medical issue that they couldn't place him with a blind person. Then he was trained for post-traumatic stress for a veteran, and then the veteran had to go out of the state and couldn't take him with him.
That's terrific. Your Honor, there's been so much discussion in public about, and some people get very angry that it seems like the person who's accused has more rights than the victims of crime. And many of that, those cases, because it plays out on television or in the press, you're the person who has to deal with these issues in the courtroom. So how do you strike that balance?
Well, like I said before, every case is different, and certainly the law provides a framework for us to work within, and it's our job to follow the law. So an example of that is a recent change in the law that in cases where there is a crime involving a victim, at the arrest stage, there is immediately a no contact provision as to the defendant and the victim. So the defendant is prohibited from having contact, direct or indirect, at the arrest stage. And again, we have to remember that an individual is innocent until proven guilty, but the law requires us to impose that condition.
And there are two sides of every story, but you know that in defending somebody who's been accused of a crime, a defense attorney is going to try to rebut or impeach the victim. Sometimes it seems when you watch these trials, it's very unfair how that goes about in the courtroom.
Well, the evidence code is what we operate within. Every judge is required to follow it. And it depends on the side with which you sympathize, whether you feel it is unfair, so to speak. But the evidence code is a very complex code or law, and those schooled in it understand the importance of following those rules.
And Autumn, so how do you prepare somebody for what happens in the courtroom? You have to tell them that they have to work with the prosecutors, and I want to ask you how you go about that, but also you have to prepare them for what they're going to get from the other side.
Correct. So I will sit down with the victim and explain to them from the very start, when you walk into the courtroom, this is what you're going to see. This is who's sitting on this side. This is who's sitting over here, where the judge is, where you're going to sit when you go up on the stand. And then I just talk to them about what the state, they have certain questions that they have to ask, and so does the defense attorney. And when they ask those questions, sometimes it seems like they're attacking you, but they have a job to do too. And we kind of go back and forth and give examples of what could be said, what might be said. And then after they're off the stand, I'll go and sit out in the hallway with them, take a little break and kind of bounce off of them. Where are you at? How are you feeling? You did a really good job. And just kind of go back and forth with them.
Who trained you to do this? How is this done?
Well, a lot of it's hands-on training, but we are designated training through the Florida Attorney General's office. Designation training, it's a 40-hour training that we go through. We constantly go to different trainings for different subject matters. I know myself and Susie Brown were both Florida Crisis Response Team trained as well, and that's another 40-hour training that we go through.
And you know, Autumn was saying in Adam's story that you are with the victim, you know, right after the crime all the way through the prosecution, sometimes after. What happens in many cases after the trial is over, even if it gets that far, in terms of helping these people move on from that process?
Well, in the criminal justice system, if the person is convicted, a lot of times there's appeals, which can come 10 years or 20 years after the actual conviction. So that victim has to, once again, know that that person could possibly get out of prison. For the victims, a lot of times anniversary dates can trigger emotional times for them, because you know it kind of reminds them of things, or it could be anything that watching a movie or something like that. So that's why we recommend that they get counseling, and everyone's different. The length of counseling is different for everyone, but it's very important to be able to process and put all the pieces back, because it's like somebody throws up a puzzle and it scatters. You have to put those pieces back. Your
Honor, what do you see here on the Suncoast? Because when we introduce these stories, I mean, the number of Americans who are victims of crime every couple of seconds is really kind of incredible, and victims of violent crime. What trend do you see in our courts here on the Suncoast? We always hear about, you know, the level of crime. I mean, are you seeing more difficult cases come in, or is it, you know, the same it's been for the last 5-10 years?
Well, I've been in the criminal justice system in one role or another probably for over 10 years now, and my experience or the caseloads are very similar. The types of crimes you see sometimes will increase and decrease, you know, based upon certain law enforcement strategies or priorities, but my belief is the caseloads are very similar today.
Let me ask you all this question. Is there a difference in how victims of crime fare through the system between a high-profile case that you may be watching on this station or reading about in the paper, or those cases that never get much attention at all?
I think a lot of victims, because they're so involved in their own victimization, they're in their heads. Once they see it on TV, it's a constant reminder of everything. They're just trying to get through the next day. And when they see it on TV, they see it in the news, they read all the posts about it, the comments. Some are good, some are bad. So then they react to that as well, and either get re-traumatized or feeling very comforted by some of the comments that are out there.
And I think that, you know, we treat all victims with the same service. It doesn't matter how high of a profile case or how small of a case it is. In that victim's mind, it's not a small case for them.
Right.
So we give them the same service as we would.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll have final thoughts from the guests. Welcome back. Being the victim of a crime, you can leave feeling powerless, but there is help out there, support and resources available. What is the best way to access them? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Your Honor, what do you want people who are watching this tonight to take away from this conversation?
Well, first I want to thank you for having me, but I think it's important for the viewers to understand that court is a place of competing interests. And in a criminal case, you have an adversarial system, the state attorney and the defense attorney. And the state attorney is the person tasked with advancing arguments to provide for certain accommodations to victims. and to work with law enforcement to ensure that any accommodations or work or support can be done.
And Susie, that's the difficult thing. The courts aren't, you know, it's in many cases you may feel that you have been victimized, but you don't always get the result that you want, and that makes your job pretty tough.
That is correct. And, you know, we make sure we tell people that, you know, you don't always find justice going through the court system. However, you know, that you always have support. And I think that's the biggest thing is for crime victims to know that there are victim advocates out there to go with them, that they don't have to go through this alone. And that they're, through a lot of agency has victim advocates as well, and not only the Sheriff's Office, but State Attorney's Office, as well as some of the domestic violence shelters.
And all them, I mean, from a resource point of view, do you have more resources, and are there more resources out there for victims than there ever have been before?
There's a ton of resources for victims. It's not just our units that are there for you, but CPC, the Jewish Children's Federation, or Foundation rather, Spark, you name it. There's almost something for everyone. We can point you in the right direction and have you get some help.
And is there any other takeaway that you think that people out there should know?
I think Susie hit it right on the head. You know, you're not alone. You've got us, you've got your support system, and when you're down and low, we're there to help pick you up and get you through.
It's a perfect place to leave it. Thank you all for being here tonight. Susie Brown is the Victim Advocate Unit Manager at the Manatee County Circuit Court. Judge ERIKA QUARTERMAINE is on the bench for the 12th Judicial Circuit, and Alan Rapolo is a Victim Coordinator at the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office.